What would you do if you stood face to face with the most terrifying warrior the world had ever seen? A giant over 9 feet tall, covered in bronze armor, wielding a spear like a tree trunk, with a voice that shook the ground and made grown men tremble in fear. Would you run? Would you hide? Or would you pick up a stone and charge straight at him with nothing but faith in your heart? This is the story of David and Goliath, the most famous underdog story ever told, and a powerful reminder that with God, even the smallest among us can defeat the greatest giants we face. But before we meet the boy who would become king, we must first understand the impossible situation that awaited him. The Philistines and the Israelites had been enemies for generations, two nations locked in an endless struggle for the promised land. Now their armies stood facing each other across the valley of Elah, camped on opposite hills, with the valleys stretched between them like an arena. The tension was unbearable, both armies waiting, watching, neither willing to make the first move. And then the Philistines sent out their secret weapon. From their ranks emerged a figure so massive, so terrifying, that the entire Israelite army took a collective step backward. His name was Goliath, and he was a giant from the city of Gath. Standing over 9 feet tall, he towered above ordinary men like a mountain towers above the hills. His armor alone weighed 125 pounds of gleaming bronze that covered him from head to toe. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and its iron point weighed 15 pounds, enough to pierce through any shield. When he walked, the ground seemed to shake, and when he spoke, his voice echoed across the valley like thunder. Every morning and every evening for 40 days, Goliath strode into the valley and issued his challenge. "Why do you come out and line up for battle?" he roared at the Israelites.
Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man, and have him come down to me, and let him fight me one-on-one. If he is able to kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." His laughter echoed across the valley, mocking their fear, challenging their faith, daring anyone to face him. "This day I defy the armies of Israel," Goliath bellowed, his voice dripping with contempt. "Give me a man and let us fight each other." But no one answered. No one stepped forward. No one dared to accept the challenge. For 40 days, the army of God cowered in their tents, paralyzed by fear of a single man. King Saul, the tallest man in all of Israel, the warrior who had led his people to many victories, stood frozen with fear. His soldiers, brave men who had fought countless battles, trembled at the sound of Goliath's voice. Every morning they would line up for battle, and every morning they would flee in terror when the giant appeared. The shame was unbearable, the fear was overwhelming, and worst of all, it seemed like there was no way out. They had forgotten something crucial, something that should have given them courage. They had forgotten that they were not just any army, they were the army of the living God. And they had forgotten that the God of Israel had never lost a battle. Meanwhile, far from the battlefield, in the quiet hills of Bethlehem, a young shepherd boy was tending his father's sheep. His name was David, the youngest of 8 brothers, so insignificant that his own father had nearly forgotten him. While his 3 oldest brothers served in Saul's army, David was left behind to watch the flock, the smallest job for the smallest son. But do not let his youth fool you, for David was no ordinary shepherd. In those quiet hills, Far from the eyes of men, David had learned to fight. When a lion came to steal a lamb from his flock, David chased it down and killed it with his bare hands. When a bear attacked his sheep, David grabbed it by its fur and struck it dead. Not for glory, not for praise, but simply because those sheep were in his care and he would protect them with his life. And in those same hills, David had learned something even more important than fighting. He had learned to trust in God. Night after night, under the stars, David would sing songs of praise to the Lord. Songs that would one day become the Psalms we still read today. He had seen God's faithfulness in the small things, and he believed God would be faithful in the big things too. David's faith was not theoretical. It was personal, tested, and proven. One day, David's father Jesse called him in from the fields. "Take this bread and cheese to your brothers at the battle lines," Jesse instructed, "and see how they are doing." David had no idea that this simple errand would change the course of history. He arrived at the Israelite camp just as the armies were lining up for another day of standoff. And then he heard it, a voice like thunder rolling across the valley. Goliath had emerged for his morning challenge, and David watched in disbelief as the entire Israelite army turned and ran. "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" David asked the soldiers around him. His words were met with nervous glances and whispered warnings. But David would not be silenced, and his questions eventually reached the ears of King Saul himself. The king summoned the young shepherd boy to his tent, curious about this youth who spoke with such boldness. David stood before the king of Israel, a shepherd boy in the presence of royalty. "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine," David declared with confidence that seemed impossible for one so young. "Your servant will go and fight him." Saul looked at the boy before him and saw only what everyone else saw, a youth too small, too young, too inexperienced. "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him," Saul replied, shaking his head. "You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David was not deterred, for he knew something Saul had forgotten. "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep," David explained. "When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God." Then David spoke the words that revealed the true source of his courage. "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul looked at David for a long moment, then finally nodded his consent. "Go, and the Lord be with you," the king said, perhaps seeing a spark of something divine in this young shepherd's eyes. Then Saul did what any reasonable commander would do. He dressed David in his own armor. The king's bronze helmet was placed on David's head, and a coat of mail was fastened around his small frame. David took a few steps and immediately knew this was wrong. The armor was too heavy, too cumbersome, too unfamiliar for someone who had never worn such things. "I cannot go in these," David said, removing the armor piece by piece, "because I am not used to them." Instead, David picked up his shepherd's staff in one hand and his simple leather sling in the other. He walked to a nearby stream and carefully selected 5 smooth stones from the water. He placed them in his shepherd's bag and began walking toward the valley. The entire army watched in stunned silence as this boy headed toward certain death. No armor, no sword, no spear, just a staff, a sling,
and an unshakable faith in God. Goliath saw David approaching and could not believe his eyes. This was the champion Israel had sent, a boy with sticks and stones. The giant's face twisted with rage and contempt. "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" Goliath roared, his voice echoing across the valley. "Come here, and I will give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." The Philistine cursed David by his gods, invoking every demon and false deity he could name. But David did not flinch, did not waver, did not retreat a single step. Instead, he spoke words that still echo through the ages. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin," David called out, his young voice carrying across the battlefield. "But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." David was not boasting in his own strength. He was declaring the power of God. Goliath began his advance, his massive feet pounding the earth with each step, his armor clanking like thunder. The giant was absolutely certain of victory, already imagining the glory of crushing this insolent child. But David did something unexpected, something that shocked both armies watching from the hills. Instead of retreating or even standing his ground, David ran straight toward the giant. As he ran, David reached into his bag and drew out a single smooth stone. He placed it in his sling and began to whirl it above his head with practiced precision. Goliath raised his javelin, ready to end this foolishness once and for all. But he was too slow. The stone flew from David's sling with deadly accuracy, cutting through the air faster than the eye could follow. It struck Goliath directly in the forehead, the one place his armor did not protect. The giant's eyes rolled back, his massive body swayed like a tree in a storm. And then, with a crash that shook the valley, Goliath fell face down on the ground, dead. The impossible had happened. The giant was defeated. For a moment, both armies stood frozen in absolute disbelief. Then David walked to where Goliath had fallen, took the giant's own sword, and cut off his head. When the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, panic swept through their ranks. They turned and fled, abandoning their camp, their weapons, their confidence shattered. The Israelite army, which had cowered in fear for 40 days, suddenly found their courage. They charged after the Philistines with a great shout, pursuing them all the way to the gates of their cities. The victory was complete, and it had all started with one boy who refused to be afraid. Not because he was brave in himself, but because he knew that God was with him. David had faced the giant not with the world's weapons, but with faith in the living God. And that faith had moved mountains, or in this case, toppled giants. The story of David and Goliath is not just ancient history. It is a message that speaks directly to our lives today. We all face giants, not literal ones perhaps, but giants nonetheless. Maybe your giant is fear that paralyzes you, telling you that you are not good enough, not strong enough, not worthy enough. Maybe your giant is an addiction that seems impossible to overcome, a habit that has held you captive for years. Maybe your giant is a relationship that feels broken beyond repair, or a dream that seems forever out of reach. Maybe your giant is doubt itself, a voice that whispers that God is not real, that faith is foolishness, that you are alone. Whatever your giant is, the story of David teaches us how to face it. First, David remembered what God had already done in his life: the lion, the bear, the countless nights of protection. When we face our giants, we must remember our own testimonies, the times God has already delivered us. Second, David refused to fight with someone else's armor. Saul's weapons were not designed for David, and the world's solutions are often not designed for God's people. We must fight our battles with the weapons God has given us: prayer, faith, scripture, and the power of the Holy Spirit. Third, and most importantly, David put his trust not in himself, but in God. His confidence was not in his own skill with a sling, but in the character and faithfulness of the living God. That is the secret that transformed a shepherd boy into a giant slayer. David did not say, "I am mighty." He said, "God is mighty." He did not say, "I will defeat you." He said, "The Lord will deliver you into my hands." The battle was never about David's strength. It was about God's glory. And that is the key to conquering every giant we face. When we make the battle about God's glory rather than our own ability, we tap into a power far greater than ourselves. The same God who was with David in that valley is with you right now. He has not changed, he has not grown weaker, and he has not forgotten you. Perhaps today you are standing in your own valley of Elah, staring at a giant that seems impossible to defeat. Perhaps you have been running from that giant for days, or weeks, or even years. Perhaps everyone around you is telling you that you cannot win, that you should give up, that your giant is too big. But I want you to hear the words of David echoing across the centuries. The battle is the Lord's. You do not have to face your giant in your own strength. You do not have to have all the answers or all the resources. You just need faith the size of a mustard seed and a God the size of the universe. The same God who guided that stone to its target is ready to guide you through your impossible situation. He is not looking for the strongest, the smartest, or the most qualified. He is looking for those who will trust him completely, even when the odds seem impossible. So pick up your 5 smooth stones of faith, hope, prayer, trust, and courage. Face your giant head on, not in your own name, but in the name of the Lord Almighty. And watch as the God who toppled Goliath brings your giants crashing down. Because with God, victory is not about the size of your army. It is about the size of your faith. What if the God who created the stars and set the seas in motion called your name, and instead of answering, you ran? What if the very waves and winds became instruments of divine pursuit, and the belly of a beast became the only place quiet enough to finally hear your own heart? This is the story of Jonah, a prophet who fled from the presence of God, swallowed by the deep, and spit back out onto the shores of mercy. It is not merely a tale of a man and a great fish. It is the story of every soul that has ever tried to outrun the call of heaven and the relentless love that refuses to let us go. In the days when Assyria's shadow stretched across the ancient world, there lived a prophet in the northern kingdom of Israel named Jonah, the son of Amittai. He was a man who knew the voice of God, who had spoken truth to kings and delivered words that bent the course of nations. But one day, the word of the Lord came to Jonah with a command that stopped him cold. Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and cry out against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. Nineveh. The very name tasted like ash in Jonah's mouth. This was no ordinary city. It was the capital of Assyria, the empire of cruelty, the nation that had swept through lands like a plague of locusts, leaving behind pyramids of skulls and rivers stained with blood. The Assyrians had perfected the art of terror. They flayed their enemies alive and hung their skins on city walls. They impaled captives on stakes and let them die slowly under the burning sun. They were the nightmare that kept Israelite mothers awake at night, clutching their children close. And God wanted Jonah to go there, to warn them, to give them a chance to repent. Jonah understood something that twisted in his gut like a knife. He knew the character of God. He knew that the Lord was gracious and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. And that was precisely the problem. If Jonah preached to Nineveh and they repented, God might spare them. The very people who had slaughtered his countrymen, who had dragged women and children into slavery, who had burned villages to the ground, they might receive the mercy that Israel's enemies did not deserve. So Jonah made his choice. Instead of traveling northeast to Nineveh, he went west, as far west as a man could go. He descended to the port city of Joppa, where the smell of salt and fish and tar hung thick in the air. There, among the weathered sailors and the creaking ships, Jonah found a vessel bound for Tarshish, at the very edge of the known world. He paid the fare, climbed aboard, and descended into the hold of the ship, as if he could hide from the one who sees all things. Scripture tells us he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, but you cannot outrun the Maker of heaven and earth. As the ship cut through the blue waters of the Mediterranean, the sky began to change. What started as a few dark clouds on the horizon grew into a wall of churning black. The wind, which had been a gentle companion, became a howling fury. The Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and a mighty tempest arose, so violent that the ship threatened to break apart. Waves crashed over the deck like the fists of an angry giant. The timbers groaned and cracked. Cargo was thrown overboard in desperation. The sailors, hardened men who had weathered many storms, were terrified. Each cried out to his own God, their voices swallowed by the screaming wind. But Jonah was not among them. He had gone down into the inner part of the ship, and there, in the darkness, he had fallen into a deep sleep. Perhaps it was exhaustion. Perhaps it was the heavy slumber of a man trying to escape not just a place, but the weight of his own conscience. The captain found him there, incredulous. "What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps your God will give thought to us, that we may not perish." Jonah stumbled onto the deck, his eyes adjusting to the chaos of the storm. The sailors had begun to cast lots, desperate to discover whose sin had brought this calamity upon them. And the lot fell on Jonah. They surrounded him, rain streaming down their faces, terror in their eyes. "Tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? Of what people are you?" Jonah looked at these men, strangers to the covenant, worshippers of gods carved from wood and stone, and something in him broke. "I am a Hebrew," he said, his voice barely audible above the wind. "And I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." The words hung in the air like a confession. The men were exceedingly afraid. They understood now. This was no ordinary storm. This was the wrath of a God powerful enough to shake the foundations of the deep. "What shall we do to you?" they asked, "that the sea may quiet down for us?" Jonah knew the answer. He had known it the moment the first wave struck the ship. "Pick me up and hurl me into the sea," he said. "Then the sea will quiet down for you, for I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you." But the sailors would not do it. Not yet. These pagans showed more compassion than the prophet of God. They rowed hard, straining against the impossible waves, trying to bring the ship to dry land. But the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. Finally, with no other choice, they cried out to the Lord, "O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood. For you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you." Then they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. In that sudden, terrible silence, the sailors stood in awe. They had witnessed the power of a God unlike any they had known. They offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. Meanwhile, Jonah plunged into the darkness of the deep, the cold water closing over him like a grave, the light of the surface growing dim above him. But God was not finished with Jonah. The Lord appointed a great fish to swallow him, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Try to imagine it. The crushing darkness, the stench of decay and salt, the slimy walls of living tissue pressing in from every side, the slow rhythm of the creature's movement through the abyss. This was not rescue as Jonah might have imagined it. This was a tomb, a living, breathing tomb. And yet, in that impossible place, Jonah finally did what he should have done from the beginning. He prayed. "I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me. Out of the belly of Sheol I cried, and you heard my voice. For you cast me into the deep, into the heart of the seas, and the flood surrounded me. All your waves and your billows passed over me. Then I said, I am driven away from your sight. Yet I shall again look upon your holy temple. The waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped about my head. I went down to the land, whose bars closed upon me forever. Yet you brought up my life from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was fainting away, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer came to you, into your holy temple. In the darkness, in the lowest place a man could go, Jonah found the presence of God he had tried so desperately to flee. He understood at last that there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run, nowhere that God's love could not reach. Those who pay regard to vain idols forsake their hope of steadfast love, he prayed. But I, with the voice of thanksgiving, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will pay. Salvation belongs to the Lord. And the Lord spoke to the fish, and it vomited Jonah out upon the dry land. He lay there on the shore, gasping, covered in the bile of the deep, blinking against a sun he thought he would never see again. The waves lapped gently at his feet. The birds cried overhead. And then the word of the Lord came to Jonah the second time. Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it the message that I tell you. This time Jonah obeyed. He walked for 3 days to reach the great city, and Nineveh was vast, a metropolis that took 3 days to cross. Its walls towered above the plain, and its gates opened onto streets teeming with merchants, soldiers, priests, and common people, all going about their lives, unaware that judgment hung over them like a sword. Jonah entered the city, his robes still stained from the belly of the fish, his eyes haunted by what he had endured, and he began to cry out. Yet 40 days and Nineveh shall be overthrown." What happened next was beyond anything Jonah expected. The people of Nineveh believed God. From the lowliest servant to the greatest noble, a wave of conviction swept through the city. They called for a fast and put on sackcloth, the coarse garments of mourning and repentance. When word reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, removed his royal robes, covered himself with sackcloth, and sat in ashes. He issued a decree that resounded through every street. "Let neither man nor beast, herd nor flock, taste anything. Let them not feed or drink water. Let man and beast be covered with sackcloth, and let them call out mightily to God. Let everyone turn from his evil way and from the violence that is in his hands. Who knows? God may turn and relent and turn from his fierce anger, so that we may not perish." And God saw their works, that they turned from their evil way, and God relented of the disaster that he had said he would do to them, and he did not do it. Nineveh was spared. 120,000 people who did not know their right hand from their left, along with much cattle, were given another chance. It was the greatest revival in the history of the ancient world. And Jonah was furious. He went outside the city and sat down east of it, building a small shelter to shade him as he waited to see what would become of the city. But his heart was a storm of its own. He prayed to the Lord, and his prayer was not thanksgiving, but accusation. "O Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish. For I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me, for it is better for me to die than to live." The Lord replied simply, "Do you do well to be angry?" Jonah did not answer. He sat in his shelter, burning with resentment, waiting for fire to fall from heaven. But instead, God appointed a plant to grow up over Jonah, providing shade and relief from the scorching sun. Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. For one night he found comfort. But when dawn came the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plant, and it withered. Then God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on Jonah's head until he was faint. Again he asked to die. "It is better for me to die than to live." And the Lord said to Jonah, "Do you do well to be angry for the plant?" Jonah snapped back, "Yes, I do well to be angry, angry enough to die." Then God spoke the final words of the book, words that echo across the centuries and pierce us still today. "You pity the plant for which you did not labor, nor did you make it grow, which came into being in a night and perished in a night." And should not I pity Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also much cattle? The book ends there, suspended in the silence of Jonah's response, or lack of one. We never learn if Jonah's heart changed, if he finally understood the breadth of God's mercy. But perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the question is not for Jonah alone, it is for us. The story of Jonah is far more than an ancient tale of a prophet and a fish. It is a mirror held up to every heart that has ever resisted the call of God, that has ever wanted mercy for ourselves, but judgment for our enemies, that has ever wondered if some people are simply beyond the reach of grace. And here is where the story becomes even more extraordinary. Centuries after Jonah emerged from the belly of the great fish, another prophet walked the dusty roads of Israel. His name was Jesus. And when the religious leaders of his day demanded a sign, he pointed them back to this very story. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Jonah's descent into the deep and his emergence on the 3rd day was a shadow, a foreshadowing of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The prophet who ran from God's call points forward to the Son who embraced it fully. Where Jonah fled from the mission to save his enemies, Jesus walked willingly to a cross to save his. Where Jonah resented the mercy shown to Nineveh, Jesus wept over Jerusalem and prayed for his executioners. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. The belly of the fish was a kind of death for Jonah, a place of darkness and despair. But it was also the place where he finally surrendered, where he finally prayed, where he finally acknowledged that salvation belongs to the Lord. In the same way, the tomb of Christ was not the end, but the beginning. From that dark cave carved in stone, life itself burst forth on the 3rd day, and with it, the promise that no one is beyond the reach of God's love. Perhaps you have been running. Perhaps there is a call on your life that you have ignored, a mission that feels too hard, a person you have refused to forgive. Perhaps you have sat outside the city of your own resentments, waiting for God to punish those you believe deserve it. Jonah's story reminds us that we are all, in some way, reluctant prophets. We are all tempted to draw lines around God's grace, to decide who is worthy and who is not. But the God who appointed a great fish, who appointed a plant and a worm and a scorching wind, is the God who orchestrates every detail of our lives for His purposes. He is patient beyond measure, merciful beyond reason, and relentless in His pursuit of every wandering heart. He does not give up, not on Nineveh, not on Jonah, and not on you. Salvation belongs to the Lord, and His love is wider than the sea, deeper than the belly of the great fish, and stronger than every wall we build to keep it out. The question that hangs in the air at the end of Jonah's story is still being asked today. Will you pity what is temporary, or will you embrace the heart of God for what is eternal? Because the God who spoke to Jonah still speaks today, and the story of redemption is still being written, one heart at a time. What if all of humanity united for a single purpose, not to worship God, but to replace Him? What if the greatest building project in ancient history was not a monument to human achievement, but a declaration of war against heaven itself? This is the story of Babel, the city where mankind spoke with one voice and one language, where ambition reached for the sky and pride built a tower toward the stars. It is the story of how God scattered the nations, confused the tongues, and reminded humanity that there is only one throne in the universe, and it is not ours to claim. The waters of the great flood had receded, the earth was washed clean, and Noah's family stepped onto dry ground as the only survivors of a world that had been swept away. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth." Fill the earth. That was the command. Spread out, populate the continents. Carry the knowledge of God to every corner of the globe. Humanity had been given a second chance, and the instructions were clear. Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, became the fathers of nations. Their children had children, and their grandchildren had grandchildren. Within a few generations, the human population began to grow rapidly once more. And remarkably, wonderfully, terrifyingly, they all spoke the same language. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. Imagine it. Every human being on the planet could understand every other human being. There were no translators needed, no barriers of communication, no misunderstandings born of foreign tongues. When a man from one family met a man from another, they spoke as brothers. Ideas flowed freely. Knowledge accumulated without the friction of linguistic confusion. Humanity was united in a way it would never be again. But unity is not always good. A body can be unified in health, or it can be unified in disease. A nation can be unified in righteousness, or unified in rebellion. The question is never simply whether we are together, but what we are together for. As people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Shinar, the region that would later be known as Babylon, in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It was good land, rich soil, a place where civilization could flourish. And there, instead of scattering across the earth as God had commanded, humanity decided to stay. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." This was technological innovation. In the mountains where Noah's Ark had landed, stone was plentiful. But here on the plain, there was no stone. So they invented a solution. They would make their own building materials, shaping clay into bricks and firing them in kilns until they were harder than rock. They used bitumen for mortar, the thick black tar that seeped from the earth, binding their bricks into structures that could withstand the ages. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Human ingenuity at its finest. Problem solving, engineering, the ability to look at an obstacle and find a way around it. These are gifts from God, reflections of the creative nature He breathed into us when He formed us from dust. But gifts can be turned to dark purposes. Tools can become weapons. And the technology that could have built homes and temples for the glory of God was about to be used for something very different. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth." There it was, the true motivation revealed in a single sentence. 3 acts of rebellion wrapped in the language of ambition. Let us build ourselves a city, not a city for God, a city for themselves, a monument to human achievement, human power, human glory. Every brick laid would be a declaration. We do not need God. We can create our own security, our own meaning, our own destiny. A tower with its top in the heavens. This was not merely a tall building. This was an attempt to reach the realm of the divine, to climb into heaven on a staircase of human construction. Ancient ziggurats were not just architectural wonders. They were temples, stairways designed to allow the gods to descend and humans to ascend. The builders of Babel were constructing a gateway to heaven on their own terms, by their own efforts, without invitation from the God who dwelt there. Let us make a name for ourselves. Here was the heart of the rebellion, the desire for fame, for legacy, for a reputation that would echo through the ages. God had promised to make Abraham's name great, but that promise had not yet been given. These builders wanted greatness without God. They wanted to be remembered forever, not for worshiping the Creator, but for rivaling Him. Lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. This was direct defiance of God's command. He had told them to fill the earth. They were determined to stay together, to concentrate their power, to build a civilization so impressive that nothing could ever scatter them. The construction began. Day after day, workers mixed clay and water, pressed the mixture into molds, and fired the bricks until they glowed orange in the kilns. Thousands of laborers carried materials to the building site. The city rose from the plain, walls and houses and marketplaces spreading outward. And at the center, the tower climbed toward the sky. Higher and higher it grew. Each level was smaller than the one below, creating the stepped pyramid shape characteristic of Mesopotamian architecture. From the top, one could see for miles in every direction, across the flat plain to the distant horizon. The builders looked up at their creation and swelled with pride. Soon, they told themselves, "We will touch the heavens." The tower became more than a building. It became a symbol, a rallying point, a declaration of human independence from divine authority. Every brick was an act of worship, not to God, but to human potential. Every day of labor was a prayer, not to the Creator, but to the creature. The whole earth had gathered in one place, speaking one language, united in one purpose, to storm the gates of heaven. But while they built, someone was watching. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. There is gentle irony in these words. The builders imagined their tower reaching into the heavens. They pictured themselves climbing to the realm of the divine. But from God's perspective, the tower was so small, so insignificant, that he had to come down to see it. The structure that filled humanity with such pride was barely visible from the throne of heaven. God did not need to come down because he was unaware of what was happening. He is omniscient, knowing all things. He came down as a judge comes to examine evidence, as a king comes to render verdict. This was a formal investigation, the divine response to human rebellion. And the Lord said, "Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them." God saw what humanity could not see. He saw the trajectory, the inevitable destination of unchecked human ambition, united by common language and purpose. If this project succeeded, it would only be the beginning. The same pride that built Babel would build other monuments to human glory. The same rebellion that rejected God's command to scatter would reject every other command. The same unity that powered this construction would power future atrocities. Nothing they propose will be impossible for them. This was not a compliment. It was a diagnosis. Humanity had been given tremendous capabilities, and without divine intervention, those capabilities would be turned entirely toward evil. The flood had washed away one wicked generation, but the seeds of that wickedness remained in human hearts. Left unchecked, Babel would become the capital of a worldwide rebellion against God. By the way, if you find any of these videos interesting or enjoyable, please consider subscribing. These take a long time to make, and it really helps out. God could have destroyed them. He could have sent fire from heaven, opened the earth to swallow the city, or unleashed another flood despite his promise. He had every right to judge this rebellion with immediate and total destruction. But God chose mercy wrapped in judgment. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. Let us. The plural language hints at the divine council, the Trinity in consultation.
the same we that had said in Genesis, "Let us make man in our image." The God who had created humanity with the gift of language would now fracture that gift into 1,000 pieces. Imagine the morning it happened. A foreman called out instructions to his crew, but the words that left his mouth were incomprehensible to their ears. Workers turned to each other in confusion, speaking what sounded like gibberish. A man shouted for more bricks, but no one understood him. Another tried to ask what was happening, but his question came out in a tongue no one recognized. Panic spread through the construction site. The carefully coordinated labor fell into chaos. Teams that had worked together for years suddenly found themselves isolated by invisible walls of incomprehension. The ropes and pulleys, the kilns and molds, the massive stones waiting to be lifted, all sat idle as humanity discovered they could no longer communicate. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. The very thing they had feared came upon them. They had built the tower to prevent being scattered, and the tower became the reason for their scattering. They had united in rebellion, and rebellion brought division. They had sought to make a name for themselves, and the only name that endured was a name of shame. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. Babel. The word sounds like the Hebrew word for confusion. The city that was meant to be a monument to human greatness became a monument to human folly. The tower that was meant to reach heaven stood unfinished, a perpetual reminder that human ambition has limits, that divine purposes cannot be thwarted, that pride goes before destruction. The builders scattered. Families that could still understand each other traveled together, moving away from those whose speech had become foreign. Over generations, these language groups developed distinct cultures, settled in different regions, and became the nations of the ancient world. The Table of Nations in Genesis 10 records their distribution, from the descendants of Shem in the Near East to the sons of Ham in Africa, to the children of Japheth spreading north and west. The tower itself eventually crumbled. Archaeologists have found the remains of ancient ziggurats in Mesopotamia, massive brick structures that may echo the original Babel. But whatever physical structure once stood on that plain is long gone, eroded by time, buried by sand, forgotten by the civilizations that rose and fell in its shadow. Yet the consequences remain. Every language barrier, every cultural misunderstanding, every war fueled by ethnic division, every failure of communication that leads to conflict, all trace back to that morning on the plain of Shinar, when God confused the tongues of humanity. But Babel is not the end of the story. Centuries later, God called a man named Abraham out of that same region and promised to make his name great. The fame that the builders of Babel had sought for themselves, God freely gave to one man who trusted him. And through Abraham's descendants, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. Millennia later, on a Jewish feast day called Pentecost, the scattered languages of humanity heard the same message at the same time. When the day of Pentecost arrived, the apostles were all together in one place. And suddenly there came from heaven a sound like a mighty rushing wind, and it filled the entire house where they were sitting. And divided tongues as of fire appeared to them, and rested on each one of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Spirit, and began to speak in other tongues, as the Spirit gave them utterance. The curse of Babel was being reversed.
At Babel, God had come down to scatter and confuse. At Pentecost, God came down to gather and clarify. At Babel, one language became many. At Pentecost, the many heard as one. Jews from every nation under heaven were gathered in Jerusalem for the feast. They heard the apostles speaking, and each one heard in his own native language. Parthians and Medes and Elamites and residents of Mesopotamia, people from the very region where Babel had stood, heard the wonderful works of God in their own tongues. We hear them telling in our own tongues the mighty works of God. What humanity had tried to achieve at Babel, building a unity that excluded God, the Holy Spirit achieved at Pentecost, creating a unity centered on God. The tower builders had wanted to make a name for themselves. The apostles proclaimed the name above all names, the name of Jesus Christ. The city of Babel had been abandoned in confusion. The Church of Christ would spread to every nation with a message that transcended every language. At Babel, humanity said, "Let us build." At the cross, Jesus said, "It is finished." At Babel, men climbed toward heaven on towers of brick. In Christ, God descended to earth in robes of flesh. At Babel, pride scattered the nations. Through the gospel, grace gathers them again. The story of Babel speaks powerfully to our age. We live in a time of unprecedented human capability. Our technology makes the builders of Babel look primitive. We have split the atom, mapped the genome, walked on the moon, and connected the world through invisible digital networks. We can communicate instantly across languages through translation software. We are more united in our capabilities than any generation before us. And yet, the question remains the same. For what purpose? Are we building towers to our own glory or temples to God's? Are we using our gifts to declare our independence from the Creator or to serve His purposes? Are we making names for ourselves or proclaiming His name? The sin of Babel was not technology. It was not ambition. It was not even unity. The sin was directing all these things away from God rather than toward Him. The builders wanted heaven without the God who made it. They wanted blessing without the one who blesses. They wanted glory without giving glory where glory was due. Every human project faces the same choice. We can build for ourselves, or we can build for God. We can seek our own fame, or we can seek His kingdom. We can unite in rebellion, or we can unite in worship. The church is meant to be the anti-Babel. We are people from every tribe and language and nation, gathered not by human ambition, but by divine grace. We speak different languages, but we confess the same Lord. We come from different cultures, but we belong to the same family. Our unity is not based on what we have built, but on what Christ has done. One day, the vision of Revelation will be fulfilled. A great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, will stand before the throne and before the Lamb, crying out with a loud voice, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb." Every language that was born at Babel will be represented in that chorus. The confusion will give way to clarity. The scattering will end in gathering. The curse will be swallowed up in blessing. Until that day, we live between Babel and the New Jerusalem. We speak our different languages and navigate our cultural differences. but we do so as citizens of a city not made with human hands, a city whose architect and builder is God. The Tower of Babel reached toward heaven, but never arrived. The cross of Christ touched heaven and earth at the same time. The place where God descended to the lowest point so that we might be raised to the highest. Do not build your own tower. Do not seek your own name. Do not trust in human unity that excludes divine purpose. Instead, come to the one who came down for you. Come to Christ, who tore the veil between heaven and earth, not with bricks and mortar, but with his own body. At Babel, God confused human language. At the cross, he spoke one word that every heart can understand: love. If you have not subscribed yet, please do not forget to do so. It really helps us continue providing you with amazing videos like this. A foreign widow. No money, no future, no hope. She had every reason to walk away, to return to her own people, to forget the broken family she had married into. Instead, she made a choice that rewrote history. 3,000 years later, her blood flows in the veins of Jesus Christ. This is Ruth, the outsider who became an ancestor of the Messiah, and her story begins with a funeral. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in Israel. It was a dark era, a time of spiritual chaos when everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And now, the land that should have flowed with milk and honey produced only dust. In Bethlehem, the house of bread, there was no bread. A man named Elimelech made a desperate decision. He took his wife Naomi and their 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and fled east to Moab. Moab was enemy territory. The Moabites had opposed Israel since the wilderness wanderings. For a Hebrew family to seek refuge there was an act of desperation, perhaps faithlessness. But Elimelech went, and in Moab he died. Naomi was left with her 2 sons in a foreign land. The boys did what their father had done. They married local women. Mahlon took a wife named Ruth. Chilion married Orpah. For 10 years, this fractured family tried to build a life in exile. Then death struck again. Both Mahlon and Chilion died, leaving 3 widows and no children. Naomi had lost everything. Her husband was in the grave. Her sons were in the grave. She had no grandchildren to comfort her old age. In that culture, a woman without men was a woman without protection, without provision, without future. Widows were among the most vulnerable people in the ancient world. When Naomi heard that the famine in Israel had ended, she decided to return home. But what about Ruth and Orpah? They were Moabites. Their families, their gods, their futures were in Moab. Why would they follow a bitter old woman to a land that despised their people? Naomi understood this. As they began the journey, she stopped and spoke with painful honesty. Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. May the Lord grant you rest in the house of another husband. She kissed them. They wept together. Both daughters-in-law protested. No, we will return with you to your people. But Naomi pressed harder. Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I more sons in my womb to become your husbands? I am too old. Even if I had hope, even if I bore sons tonight, would you wait until they were grown? No, my daughters, it is exceedingly bitter to me, for the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. They wept again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye and turned back toward Moab. Scripture does not condemn her. She made the sensible choice. But Ruth clung to Naomi. The Hebrew word suggests a fierce, desperate grip. The same word used when Genesis says, "A man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife." Ruth held on with the tenacity of a bride refusing to release her groom. "See," Naomi said, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after her." But Ruth spoke words that have echoed through 3,000 years of human history. "Do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you." Consider what Ruth was saying. She was abandoning her homeland for a foreign country. She was leaving her Moabite identity to join a nation that despised Moabites. She was forsaking Chemosh, the god of her fathers, to worship the Lord. She was committing not just to a journey, but to a lifetime. Not just to the good days, but to the grave itself. This was conversion. This was covenant. This was faith reaching into the unknown. When Naomi saw that Ruth was determined, she said no more. The two women walked to Bethlehem, a journey of many days through dangerous territory. Two unprotected widows, carrying what little they had, sleeping in the open, trusting God for every step. When they arrived, the whole town was stirred. The women said, "Is this Naomi?" But Naomi was not the woman who had left. "Do not call me Naomi," she said. "Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty." Naomi meant pleasant. Mara meant bitter. She was renaming herself according to her pain. But standing beside her, invisible to her grief-blinded eyes, was the treasure that would redeem everything. They arrived at the beginning of barley harvest, and Ruth immediately took action. She did not sit in self-pity. She volunteered for the back-breaking work of gleaning, following behind harvesters to gather whatever scraps they left behind. The law of Moses commanded that landowners leave the edges of their fields and the fallen grain for the poor, the widow, and the foreigner. Ruth was all three. "Let me go to the field and glean," she told Naomi. "Go, my daughter." So Ruth went out. And she happened to come to the field belonging to Boaz, a wealthy landowner who was a relative of Naomi's dead husband. She happened to come. From Ruth's perspective, it was random chance. From heaven's perspective, it was divine appointment. Boaz arrived from Bethlehem to inspect the harvest. He greeted his workers with blessing. "The Lord be with you." They answered, "The Lord bless you." This was a man of faith. Then his eyes fell on Ruth. "Whose young woman is this?" he asked his foreman. "She is the Moabite who came back with Naomi," the servant replied. She asked permission to glean and has worked from early morning with barely a rest. Boaz approached her. "Listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field. Stay here with my young women. I have ordered the men not to touch you. When you are thirsty, drink from the water my servants have drawn." Ruth fell on her face, bowing to the ground. "Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should notice me, since I am a foreigner?" Boaz answered with words that revealed how far her reputation had spread. All that you have done for your mother-in-law since your husband died has been fully told to me. How you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May a full reward be given you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Under whose wings? Remember these words. They will return. Boaz invited Ruth to eat with his workers. He passed her roasted grain. She ate until satisfied. Then he secretly instructed his men, "Let her glean even among the sheaves. Pull out grain from the bundles and leave it for her. Do not rebuke her." By the way, if you find any of these videos interesting or enjoyable, please consider subscribing. These take a long time to make, and it really helps out. That evening, Ruth beat out what she had gathered. It was about 30 pounds of barley, an extraordinary amount for a single day. She returned to Naomi, who was astonished. "Where did you glean today? Blessed be the man who noticed you." Ruth told her everything. The man's name is Boaz. Naomi's voice changed. For the first time since Moab, hope crept into her words. May he be blessed by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. The man is a close relative of ours. He is one of our redeemers. A redeemer, in Hebrew, Goel, one of the most important concepts in Israelite law. A Goel was a kinsman with the right and responsibility to rescue a relative from difficulty. He could buy back lost land. He could pay a relative's debts. He could marry a widow to continue the family line. Boaz was a Goel. He had the legal right to redeem Naomi's family, to restore what famine and death had stolen, to give Ruth a future and a hope. Ruth continued gleaning in Boaz's field through the barley harvest and the wheat harvest. Weeks passed. Naomi watched, and she began to form a plan. "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may go well with you? Is not Boaz our relative? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor." Naomi's instructions were bold. Ruth was to wash, anoint herself with oil, put on her best clothes, and go to the threshing floor where Boaz would sleep after the celebration. She was to note where he lay down, then uncover his feet and lie there. This was not immoral. Ruth was not sneaking into his bed for an illicit encounter. She was placing herself at his feet in a posture of humble submission, silently asking if he would exercise his right as Redeemer. It was a proposal wrapped in vulnerability. "All that you say, I will do," Ruth answered. That night, she crept to the threshing floor. She watched Boaz eat and drink until his heart was merry. She saw where he lay down at the edge of the grain pile. Then she came softly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. At midnight, Boaz stirred. He turned over and found a woman at his feet. "Who are you?" he whispered into the darkness. "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." Spread your wings. She was echoing his own blessing from their first meeting. He had spoken of God's wings of refuge. Now she was asking him to become the human embodiment of that divine protection. She was asking him to redeem her. Boaz's response revealed his character. "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first.
in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. Do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. A worthy woman. The same phrase used in Proverbs to describe the ideal wife. Ruth's reputation was spotless, but there was a complication. It is true that I am a redeemer, Boaz continued, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight. In the morning, if he will redeem you, good. But if he is not willing, then, as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Another kinsman had a closer legal claim. The law had to be followed. Ruth lay at his feet until morning, then slipped away before dawn. Boaz protected her reputation, but he did not send her home empty. He filled her cloak with 6 measures of barley, a sign of his intentions. When Ruth told Naomi everything, the older woman smiled. Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. The man will not rest until he settles this today. Naomi knew Boaz. That morning, Boaz went to the city gate where legal matters were decided. He gathered 10 elders as witnesses, and by providence, the nearer Redeemer walked by. Boaz called him over. He presented the case. Naomi is selling the land that belonged to Elimelech. You have the first right to buy it. Will you redeem it? The man agreed. Land was wealth. Land was legacy. I will redeem it. Then Boaz revealed the full picture. The day you buy the field from Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. The land came with an obligation. Any children Ruth bore would inherit the property in her dead husband's name, not the Redeemer's. He would be paying for land that would belong to another man's line. The cost was too high. The Redeemer withdrew. I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself. He removed his sandal and handed it to Boaz, the ancient sign of transferring property rights. Then he walked out of history, unnamed and forgotten. Boaz stood before the elders. You are witnesses this day that I have bought from Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to his sons. Also Ruth the Moabite I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. You are witnesses. The people blessed them with words that proved prophetic. May the Lord make this woman like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring the Lord will give you by this young woman. Boaz took Ruth as his wife. The Lord opened her womb. She bore a son. The women of Bethlehem gathered around Naomi. Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer. May his name be renowned in Israel. He shall be to you a restorer of life, and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. More than 7 sons. In a culture that prized sons above all else, this was the highest compliment. Ruth's love exceeded the value of a perfect family. Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap. The woman who had called herself bitter now held joy in her arms. The widow who claimed God had emptied her was overflowing. They named him Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of David. A Moabite widow gleaning for scraps in a Bethlehem field, became the great-grandmother of Israel's greatest king. And from David's line, 1,000 years later, came Jesus Christ, born in that same Bethlehem, the true Redeemer of the world. The story of Ruth is a gospel story. We were foreigners, strangers to the covenant, without hope and without God. Like Ruth, we had no claim on divine blessing. Like Ruth, we deserved nothing from the God of Israel. But there was a Redeemer. Jesus Christ is our Boaz. He saw us gleaning in the poverty of this fallen world, desperate for scraps, hopeless and helpless. He noticed us when we expected to be overlooked. He protected us when we were vulnerable. He provided for us far beyond what we deserved. And at infinite cost to himself, he redeemed us. Boaz paid silver to acquire Ruth. Christ paid his blood to acquire us. Boaz spread his wings over a foreign widow. Christ spreads his wings over all who come to him. Boaz lifted Ruth from the fields into his own home. Christ lifts us from death into eternal life. The kinsman redeemer had to be a relative, close enough to have the legal right. Jesus became flesh, became our brother, became close enough to save. The kinsman redeemer had to be willing. Jesus laid down his life willingly. The kinsman redeemer had to pay the price. Jesus paid it all. Where you go, I will go. Your people shall be my people. Your God, my God. These are the words of every soul that leaves the old life to follow Christ. We cling to him as Ruth clung to Naomi. We forsake our former gods as Ruth forsook Chemosh. We step into the unknown, trusting that the Redeemer who calls us will also keep us. Perhaps you feel like Ruth today, far from home, gleaning for scraps in a life that has not turned out as planned, wondering if anyone sees your faithfulness, your struggle, your quiet perseverance in the hard places. There is a Redeemer. He knows your story. He sees what no one else sees. And he is inviting you to take refuge under his wings. Perhaps you feel like Naomi, bitter, empty, convinced that God has turned against you. Look again. Standing beside you, perhaps invisible to your grief-blinded eyes, may be the very person, the very circumstance, the very answer you have been too wounded to recognize. God was not finished with Naomi. He is not finished with you. Or perhaps you are the other Redeemer, the unnamed man who walked away when the cost was too high. You have heard the gospel. You know what is required. But the price seems too great, the sacrifice too demanding, the commitment too complete. Do not walk away. Do not remove your sandal and hand your redemption to someone else. The cost of following Christ is high, but the cost of refusing him is infinitely higher. Ruth's story reminds us that God's grace crosses every boundary we construct. She was a Moabite, and the law said no Moabite could enter the assembly of the Lord. Yet she became an ancestor of the Messiah. She was a widow with nothing, yet she gained everything. She was a foreigner, yet she became family. If God could redeem Ruth, he can redeem you. If God could use a Moabite widow to fulfill his eternal purposes, he can use anyone. Your past does not disqualify you. Your foreignness does not exclude you. Your emptiness is exactly what he came to fill. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. That ancient prayer still rises to heaven today, and the answer is still yes. Come to him, cling to him. He will not let you go. If you have not subscribed yet, please do not forget to do so. It really helps us continue providing you with amazing videos like this.
What if everything you had lost was actually positioning you for something greater? What if the tragedy of your past, the circumstances you never chose, and the identity you were forced to hide, were all threads in a tapestry of divine purpose you could not yet see? This is the story of Esther, an orphaned Jewish girl who became queen of the most powerful empire on earth, a woman who risked execution to save her people, and a hero who discovered that sometimes God places us exactly where we need to be for such a time as this. It is a story where God's name is never mentioned, yet his fingerprints are on every page. The Persian Empire stretched across the ancient world like a colossus. From the shores of India to the borders of Ethiopia, 127 provinces bowed before the throne of King Xerxes. His palace in Susa glittered with gold and marble. His armies numbered in the millions. His word was law, and his whim was fate. In the 3rd year of his reign, Xerxes held a feast to display his glory. For 180 days, he paraded his wealth before the nobles, princes, and military commanders of his realm. When that celebration ended, he opened the palace gates to the common people of Susa for 7 more days of feasting. Wine flowed without restriction. The gardens sparkled with white and blue linens, silver rings, marble pillars, and couches of gold and silver. On the 7th day, when the king's heart was merry with wine, he summoned Queen Vashti to appear before his guests wearing her royal crown. He wanted to display her beauty as he had displayed his treasures, to parade her before drunken men as another ornament of his power. Vashti refused. Her defiance sent shockwaves through the palace. The king's own wife had publicly humiliated him. His advisors warned that her rebellion would inspire women throughout the empire to disobey their husbands. Acting on their counsel, Xerxes issued a decree that could never be revoked. Vashti was banished from his presence forever. A new queen must be found. And so began a search that would reach into every corner of the empire, gathering beautiful young virgins to compete for a crown. Among those taken to the palace was a Jewish orphan named Hadassah. She had lost everything. Her parents had died when she was young. She had been raised in exile, far from the homeland her people remembered with longing. Her only family was her cousin Mordecai, who had adopted her as his own daughter and given her a Persian name to help her survive in a foreign land. Esther. The name meant star, and perhaps Mordecai sensed that this quiet, beautiful girl was destined to shine in ways neither of them could imagine. When Esther was taken to the king's palace, Mordecai gave her careful instructions. Do not reveal your people or your kindred. In an empire where Jews were scattered exiles, where prejudice could turn deadly without warning, Esther's identity became her secret. She entered the palace as a Persian maiden, her heritage hidden behind a gentle smile and graceful obedience. For 12 months, each young woman underwent beauty treatments before her night with the king. Oils, perfumes, cosmetics, an entire year of preparation for a single evening that would determine her fate. When her turn came, each woman could request whatever she wanted to take with her, from the harem to the king's chambers. Esther asked for nothing except what Hegai, the keeper of the women, advised. She did not demand luxury or adornment. She trusted the wisdom of those who knew the king's preferences better than she did. And in this small act of humility, she revealed the character that would later save a nation. When Esther was brought to King Xerxes, he loved her more than all the other women. She won grace and favor in his sight. He set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. A Jewish orphan now sat on the throne of the greatest empire in the world. But the story was only beginning. Mordecai continued to sit at the king's gate, the place where official business was conducted. He could not enter the palace to see his adopted daughter, but he remained close, watching, waiting, praying for her safety. One day, Mordecai overheard two of the king's eunuchs plotting assassination. Bigthan and Teresh, guardians of the threshold, spoke in hushed tones of murdering Xerxes. Mordecai immediately sent word to Esther, and Esther informed the king, giving credit to her cousin. An investigation confirmed the plot. The conspirators were hanged. The incident was recorded in the official chronicles of the kingdom. But Mordecai received no reward, no recognition, no honor. His name was simply written in a book and forgotten, or so it seemed. After these events, King Xerxes elevated a man named Haman the Agagite to the highest position in the empire. All the royal officials at the king's gate were commanded to kneel and pay honor to Haman. Everyone obeyed, everyone except Mordecai. Day after day, Mordecai refused to bow. When the other officials asked why he disobeyed the king's command, he told them he was a Jew. Perhaps the command to bow violated his conscience. Perhaps ancient enmity between the Jews and the Agagites, descendants of Israel's old enemies, burned in his blood. Whatever the reason, Mordecai would not bend his knee to Haman. When Haman learned of this defiance, rage consumed him. But killing Mordecai alone seemed too small a revenge. When he discovered that Mordecai was a Jew, Haman conceived a plan of monstrous scope. He would destroy not just one man, but an entire people. Haman approached the king with poisoned words. There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the king's treasuries. 10,000 talents, an astronomical sum, perhaps 2/3 of the empire's annual revenue. Haman was willing to pay a fortune to fund genocide. The king removed his signet ring and gave it to Haman. Keep the silver, and do with the people as it seems good to you. With those casual words, Xerxes signed the death warrant of an entire nation. Haman cast lots, called Purim, to determine the date of destruction. The lot fell on the 13th day of the 12th month. Decrees were written, sealed with the king's ring, and sent by courier to every province. On the appointed day, all Jews, young and old, women and children, were to be killed, and their possessions plundered. The couriers went out in haste. The decree was published in Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink while the city was thrown into confusion. When Mordecai learned what had happened, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went into the midst of the city, wailing with a loud and bitter cry. Throughout the provinces, Jews fasted and wept and mourned. The date of their annihilation had been set in stone. Esther heard that Mordecai was in mourning, but did not know why. She sent garments for him to wear, but he refused them. Then she sent a trusted servant to find out what was wrong. Mordecai told him everything. He gave the servant a copy of the decree and charged him to show it to Esther, urging her to go to the king and plead for her people. By the way, if you find any of these videos interesting or enjoyable, please consider subscribing. These take a long time to make, and it really helps out. Esther's response revealed the danger she faced. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law: to be put to death, except the one to whom the king holds out the golden scepter so that he may live. And I have not been called to come in to the king these 30 days. The king had not summoned her in a month. She had no guarantee of welcome. To approach him uninvited was to risk instant execution. Esther was queen, but even queens could die for breaking protocol. Mordecai's reply cut through her fear with the sharp edge of truth. Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Then came the words that have echoed through centuries, words that transformed a frightened queen into a courageous hero. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this? For such a time as this. Every loss Esther had suffered, every circumstance she had not chosen, every hidden part of her identity had led to this moment. She was not queen by accident. She was positioned by providence. Esther's fear gave way to faith. Her response was the response of someone who had counted the cost and chosen obedience over safety. Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf. And do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And then 3 words that still inspire courage in the face of impossible odds. If I perish, I perish. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace. Her heart must have pounded as she waited. Would the king extend his scepter, or would the guards seize her for execution? When the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight, and he held out to her the golden scepter. Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. "What is it, Queen Esther?" the king asked. "What is your request? It shall be given you, even to the half of my kingdom." But Esther did not blurt out her plea. With wisdom and patience, she set a different course. "If it please the king, let the king and Haman come today to a feast that I have prepared for the king." The king agreed. He and Haman attended Esther's banquet. At the feast, Xerxes again asked what she desired. Again, Esther delayed. "Let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the feast that I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said." Haman left the banquet in high spirits. He had been singularly honored by the queen herself. But his joy turned to rage when he passed Mordecai at the gate, and the Jew still refused to bow. Haman went home and boasted to his wife and friends about his wealth, his sons, and his favor with the king and queen. "Yet all this means nothing to me," he said, "so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate." His wife Zeresh and his friends gave him counsel. Let a gallows 50 cubits high be made, and in the morning tell the king to have Mordecai hanged upon it. Then go joyfully with the king to the feast. The idea pleased Haman, and he had the gallows made. 75 feet high, it would tower over Susa, a public monument to what happened to those who defied Haman the Agagite. That night, the king could not sleep. This seemingly small detail was the hinge upon which the entire story turned. Xerxes ordered the book of memorable deeds to be read to him. And as the scribes read through the chronicles, they came to the account of how Mordecai had uncovered the assassination plot and saved the king's life. What honor or distinction has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his servants replied. At that very moment, Haman entered the outer court. He had come early to ask permission to hang Mordecai on the gallows he had built. Who is in the court? The king asked. Haman, his servants answered. Let him come in, the king commanded. Haman entered, ready to request Mordecai's death. But before he could speak, the king asked him a question. What should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor? Haman's heart swelled with pride. Surely the king meant him. Who else could it be? He answered with elaborate detail. Let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden, and a royal crown. Let one of the king's most noble officials array the man in the robes, and lead him on the horse through the square of the city, proclaiming, Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. The king smiled. Hurry, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned. The color must have drained from Haman's face. With trembling hands, he arrayed his enemy in royal robes. With bitter lips, he proclaimed honor to the man he had planned to hang. When it was over, Haman hurried home, his head covered in shame. His wife and advisors saw the truth clearly. If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of the Jewish people, you will not overcome him, but will surely fall before him. While they were yet talking, the king's eunuchs arrived to bring Haman to Esther's second banquet. At the feast, the king again asked Esther what she desired. This time she did not delay. If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be granted me for my wish, and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. The king was stunned. Who is he, and where is he, who has dared to do this? Esther pointed at the man across the table. A foe and enemy, this wicked Haman. The king rose in fury and stormed into the garden. Haman, seeing that his fate was sealed, threw himself on Esther's couch to beg for mercy. When Xerxes returned and saw Haman falling on the couch where the queen reclined, his rage exploded. Will he even assault the queen in my presence, in my own house? The servants covered Haman's face, marking him for death. One of them mentioned the gallows, 75 feet high, that Haman had prepared for Mordecai. Hang him on that, the king commanded. So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. The man who had plotted genocide died on the instrument of death he had built for another. But the danger remained. The decree against the Jews was still in effect, sealed with the king's ring, unchangeable by Persian law. Esther again approached the king, falling at his feet, weeping and pleading for her people. The king could not revoke his own decree, but he gave Esther and Mordecai permission to write a new decree in his name. The second decree gave the Jews the right to assemble and defend themselves, to destroy any armed force that attacked them. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the day appointed for destruction, the Jews instead gained victory over their enemies. Throughout the empire, those who had planned to murder them were themselves destroyed. In Susa, Haman's 10 sons were killed and hanged on the gallows. What had been decreed as a day of destruction became a day of triumph. And so the Jews established the festival of Purim to commemorate their deliverance, a celebration that continues to this day. Mordecai was elevated to second in rank to King Xerxes. The orphan girl's cousin, who had once sat at the gate, now wielded authority over all the provinces. And Esther, the hidden Jew, the reluctant queen, became forever known as the woman who saved her people. The book of Esther is unique in Scripture. God's name is never mentioned. There are no miracles, no prophets, no angels. Yet the entire story pulses with divine providence. The timing is too perfect. The coincidences are too precise. The reversals are too complete to be anything but the hand of God working behind the scenes. A sleepless night, an unread record, a gallows built for one man becoming the instrument of another's death. These are not accidents. They are the fingerprints of a God who is always at work, even when we cannot see him. The story of Esther points forward to another who would save his people from destruction. Like Esther, Jesus left his royal position to identify with those who were condemned. Like Esther, he risked everything to intercede for his people. Like Esther, he said, "If I perish, I perish," and walked willingly toward death so that others might live. But Jesus did more than risk his life. He gave it. The decree of death that hung over humanity could not be revoked. The wages of sin is death, and that law could not be changed. So Jesus took the sentence upon himself. He hung on the gallows that should have been ours. And because he died, we live. Because he was condemned, we are delivered. Because he faced judgment alone, we will never face it at all. Haman thought he had won when the decree was signed. Satan thought he had won when Jesus was crucified. But God specializes in reversals. The gallows becomes deliverance. The cross becomes salvation. The day appointed for destruction becomes the day of ultimate victory. Perhaps you wonder where God is in your story. Perhaps you face circumstances that seem beyond hope, enemies who seem unstoppable, decrees that cannot be reversed. Perhaps you have been waiting for God to act, and the heavens seem silent. Look at Esther. God's name was never spoken, but God's hand was never absent. He was working in palace politics, in sleepless nights, in forgotten records, in precise timing. He is working in your story too, even when you cannot see it. And perhaps, like Esther, you have been placed where you are for such a time as this. Your circumstances are not accidents. Your position is not coincidence. God has a purpose for you, right where you are, right in this moment. The question is not whether God has a plan. The question is whether you will trust him enough to act. If I perish, I perish. That is the prayer of someone who has surrendered outcomes to God. That is the faith of someone who values obedience over safety. That is the courage that changes history. May it be yours. If you have not subscribed yet, please do not forget to do so. It really helps us continue providing you with amazing videos like this. What if your faithfulness to God became the very weapon your enemies used against you? What if the habits of devotion you had practiced for a lifetime led you not to blessing, but to a death sentence? And the only thing standing between you and being torn apart by wild beasts was the faithfulness of the God you refused to deny. This is the story of Daniel, a man who served pagan kings with excellence for over 60 years, who rose to the highest positions of power in 2 world empires, and who faced the jaws of hungry lions rather than compromise his prayers. It is a story that proves that when we are faithful to God, God is faithful to us, even in the darkest pit. The year was approximately 539 BC. The mighty Babylonian Empire, which had conquered Jerusalem and carried the Jews into exile, had itself been conquered. In a single night, while King Belshazzar feasted and drank wine from the sacred vessels of the Jewish temple, the armies of Persia diverted the Euphrates River and marched under the walls of Babylon. The king was slain, the empire fell, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom. Daniel had seen it all. He had been taken from Jerusalem as a teenager, selected for his intelligence and appearance to serve in Nebuchadnezzar's court. He had interpreted dreams that baffled every wise man in Babylon. He had watched Nebuchadnezzar go mad and then be restored. He had read the handwriting on the wall that pronounced doom on Belshazzar. Now, in his 80s, Daniel witnessed yet another transfer of world power. Most men his age would have faded into obscurity, but Daniel was not most men. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Scripture tells us the reason for Daniel's elevation. An excellent spirit was in him. An excellent spirit. This was not merely competence or intelligence, though Daniel had both. This was something deeper, a quality of character that set him apart from every other official in the empire. Daniel served with integrity when others cut corners. He spoke truth when others flattered. He remained faithful when others compromised. For over 6 decades in pagan courts, he had maintained his devotion to the God of Israel without wavering. The king planned to set Daniel over the whole kingdom, above even the other 2 high officials. Daniel, a Jewish exile, a foreigner, a man who worshipped a god the Persians did not acknowledge, was about to become the 2nd most powerful man in the world. His colleagues were furious. The other officials and satraps began to search for grounds for complaint against Daniel. They audited his accounts. They examined his decisions. They investigated every aspect of his administration. They were looking for corruption, for bribery, for any hint of dishonesty they could use to destroy him. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Imagine living a life so blameless that your enemies, after exhaustive investigation, could find nothing against you. No hidden sins, no secret compromises, no skeletons in any closet. Daniel's integrity was absolute. His enemies were forced to a terrible conclusion. We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel, unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. They could not attack his performance. They could not attack his character. The only vulnerability they could find was his faithfulness to God. And so they devised a plan of diabolical cunning. They came before King Darius with flattery on their lips. "O King Darius, live forever." All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors, are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. They claimed that all the officials had agreed. This was a lie. Daniel had not been consulted, but Darius, flattered by the proposal that he alone should be the object of prayer for an entire month, did not investigate. He signed the document. "Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked." The trap was set. The law of the Medes and Persians was immutable. Once signed, not even the king himself could undo it. Daniel's enemies had used his own faithfulness against him, and they had made certain there would be no escape. When Daniel learned that the document had been signed, he knew exactly what it meant. He knew the penalty. He knew his enemies were watching. He knew that a single missed prayer, a single closed window, a single compromise would save his life. He went to his house, where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem, and he got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. As he had done previously. This is the key to understanding Daniel's courage. His faithfulness in the crisis was not exceptional. It was habitual. He had prayed 3 times a day facing Jerusalem for over 60 years. This was not a dramatic gesture of defiance. This was simply Daniel being Daniel. He did not increase his prayers to make a statement. He did not decrease them to preserve his life. He continued as he had always done. The windows remained open. His enemies watched and waited. And when they saw him kneeling, praying, giving thanks to his God, they had what they needed. They rushed to the king with their accusation. "Did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions?" The king confirmed it. "The thing stands fast, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked." Then they delivered the blow. Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. The king's face fell. He realized instantly what had happened. He had been manipulated. The law he had signed to honor himself was actually designed to destroy the one official he trusted most. Darius was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel, and he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. But his enemies would not relent. "O king, know that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed." The king was trapped by his own decree. The law he had signed in pride now bound him in grief. With heavy heart, Darius gave the command. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. By the way, if you find any of these videos interesting or enjoyable, please consider subscribing. These take a long time to make, and it really helps out.
The lion's den was not a cage. It was a pit carved deep into the rock, covered by a stone at the top. Lions used for royal executions were kept hungry, fed just enough to stay alive, their predatory instincts honed to a razor's edge. When prey was thrown into the pit, death was swift and brutal. Daniel was lowered into the darkness. Above him, he could hear the scraping of the stone as it was rolled into place. Then the king's voice, strained with emotion, spoke words that revealed his desperate hope.
May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. The king sealed the stone with his own signet and the signet of his lords, so that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then Darius went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Picture the scene. In the palace above, a pagan king who barely knew the God of Israel paced through the sleepless hours, unable to eat, unable to rest, tormented by the fate of the man he had been tricked into condemning. And in the pit below, Daniel stood in darkness, surrounded by the hot breath and low growls of hungry lions. What did Daniel pray in that pit? Scripture does not tell us, but we can imagine. Perhaps he recited the Psalms he had memorized as a boy in Jerusalem. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Perhaps he recalled the promises God had made to his people. "Fear not, for I am with you." Perhaps he simply rested in the presence of the God he had served his entire life, trusting that whether he lived or died, he belonged to the Lord. The lions did not touch him. Then, at break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" That question hung in the morning air. The king feared the worst. He had heard no cries in the night. Surely Daniel was dead, torn to pieces, devoured by beasts that knew no mercy. Then Daniel spoke, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm." He was alive, not a scratch, not a wound, not a single mark from the lions that should have killed him the moment he entered the pit. God had sent his angel to close the mouths of the beasts. The same lions that would tear apart Daniel's accusers had become as gentle as lambs in the presence of the man who trusted God. Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Because he had trusted in his God. That is the summary of Daniel's deliverance. Not because he was clever, not because he was powerful, not because he had political connections, because he trusted God. But the story was not finished, and the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. The lions were hungry. They had been hungry all along. The only reason they had not devoured Daniel was divine intervention. The moment ordinary men entered that pit, the beasts did what beasts do. The same den that had been a place of miraculous preservation became a place of terrible judgment. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. A pagan king who had signed a decree demanding that he alone be worshipped, now issued a decree commanding reverence for the God of Israel. Daniel's faithfulness in the pit had become a testimony to an entire empire. So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. The story of Daniel in the lion's den is not merely an ancient tale of miraculous escape. It is a pattern that points to something far greater. Like Daniel, Jesus was falsely accused by jealous enemies. Like Daniel, he was condemned by a ruler who found no fault in him. Like Daniel, he was sealed in a pit of death. But unlike Daniel, Jesus did not escape death. He embraced it. He descended into the grave not because he deserved it, but because we did. And on the third morning, another stone was rolled away. Another pit was found empty. Another king, the King of Kings, emerged victorious over the power of death itself. Daniel's God sent an angel to shut the lions' mouths. Jesus' God raised him from the dead. Daniel walked out of the pit unharmed. Jesus walked out of the tomb alive forevermore. The same God who delivered Daniel is the God who offers deliverance to you. Not always from suffering, but always through it. Not always from the pit, but always with you in the pit. He is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders. Perhaps you face your own lions today. Perhaps enemies have conspired against you. Perhaps your faithfulness has become the very thing used to attack you. Perhaps you find yourself in a pit of circumstances, surrounded by dangers that threaten to tear you apart. Hear the testimony of Daniel. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. The same God who closed the mouths of lions can close the mouths of your accusers. The same God who preserved Daniel through the night can preserve you through your darkest hour. The same God who vindicated his servant before a watching empire can vindicate you before a watching world. But Daniel's story also reminds us of something essential. His courage in the crisis was rooted in his faithfulness before the crisis. He prayed 3 times a day as he had done previously. The habits of devotion he had cultivated over a lifetime sustained him when everything was on the line. Do not wait until you are in the lion's den to start praying. Build your faith now. Open your windows toward heaven now. Get on your knees now, while the sun still shines, so that when the darkness comes, you will know the God who walks with you through it. Daniel was found blameless before God, not sinless, but blameless. His heart was wholly devoted. His life was consistently faithful. His trust was unwavering. May the same be said of you. And may the God of Daniel, the living God who endures forever, be your God too. The God who shuts lions' mouths, the God who rolls stones away, the God who turns pits of death into places of testimony, He is faithful. Trust him. If you have not subscribed yet, please do not forget to do so. It really helps us continue providing you with amazing videos like this.